I would say I value progress over perfection. So whatever you're pursuing personally, I think it helps you dramatically professional. Growth mindset is something I'm absolutely focused in on. I always tell my people solution oriented. So if something happens or there's a challenge, you plan to solve it. Start from there. If we've learned anything in the last 2 decades, the people at the top need to be held the most accountable. Invest as much as you can in identifying and finding the talent that's out there. I lead like a Gen Xer. I hire good people. I spend a tremendous amount of time training them, and then I get out of the way.
Hello and welcome to the Practical Leadership Podcast, where leaders share their tools and practical advice to make you a better leader today. My name is Max Kozlowski. I will be your host, and today we have a wonderful guest with us, Dr. Robert DeFinis. He has been working with children, athletes, coaches, teams, leaders, and organizations for over 20 years. He helps them deliver optimal performance. He has received recognition from Smart CEO and the Philadelphia Social Innovation Journal. He has an impressive academic background, doctorate in organizational behavior and leadership, master's in education, certifications in data science, ethical leadership, Six Sigma, could go on. He has written books like The Hero Teacher and Gen Exceptional, as well as children's books where he tackles contemporary issues. And one of the things that I love about him is that he's the person that does the research, develops the findings, and then puts them into play. And he teaches everybody else how to leverage that insight, leverage that knowledge, and help people do better, perform better, live and lead better lives. So I am super happy that you're here. Robert, great to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited about this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you. So Robert, before we get started, what is something good, fun, happy that is happening in your world?
You know, this is an exciting year for me. I'm finally able to tackle a lot of my side projects. You know, we get bogged down so often that we don't get an opportunity to do our own research, to pursue our own, professional goals. And this year it's been amazing. I've had the opportunity to kind of reprioritize, if you will, and look at what I want to accomplish in the short term as far as academic research and findings and just being in that my academic writings, if you will. And this year I've been able to kind of prioritize and put those things into play, and it's just the last 6 months have been very rewarding. This project that I've been working on, my book on multi-generations in the workplace, it's been almost 2 years in the making, and you just never find enough time to get these things done. And I've been fortunate enough, like I said, in the last year to kind of put things into play, and now it's in publication, it's out there in the universe, and now we're talking about it, and it's very exciting.
I appreciate that. And I can just tell the passion and the care that you have for this, right? So the first thing is that you talk about when I ask that question is work, but it's transformational work. It's work that makes the world a better place. So I appreciate that. And I love what you're talking about. We will probably not go into that, but that ability to work on what really drives you and what really motivates you and what really gets you going. And sometimes we have certain obligations and certain things what we need to get done, but being able to free yourself from that and work on what matters most to you.
Yeah, it's well said. I think we get really bogged down with the 9 to 5 and our responsibilities, whether they be professional and personal, that we kind of put things to the back burner, and sometimes we have to bring them to the forefront. They ignite us, right? I often talk to my colleagues and those that I lead, and I say, it's really important. It's exceptionally important to be involved, whether they're community projects, whether they're extracurricular activities, whatever it is, because it will enhance your work. It will enhance the things you're doing in the work environment. So whatever you're pursuing personally, I think it helps you dramatically professionally.
Yeah. So be involved with things you're passionate about, right? And it doesn't mean you have to necessarily dedicate all of your life to it, but definitely be part of that. It reminds me of like the Google 20% time, where you had the opportunity to connect with a project that was meaningful to you. It was well aligned with the organization and its priorities and its goals, but still you didn't have to be in that department. You could decide to collaborate and add value to that, and it led to major breakthroughs, major products, and billions of dollars in revenue and profit. So I think you're saying the same, right? When you get to do that, it actually ends up enhancing you in many ways.
Yeah, creating the space. And when organizations just like Google, when they did that and they took that, and they were one of the first to, execute something of that is a big thinking, right? Taking that, and it's also risk. They had to risk the fact that they were going to put their peoples in a position for a portion of their day that they didn't know really what they were going to be doing. But you get the creative juices going, you get the collaboration going, and it turned to be very profitable for them also. The bottom line was also impacted. And I can only imagine, not knowing any of the studies there, how it impacted morale. I would imagine morale was through the roof and people valued, they saw the value that the organization had in them. So I think it works both ways.
Yeah. So I have a little bit of a corporate background, and I can tell you that if I would have had that opportunity to do that, I would probably still be in corporate, right? But I had my pursuits, my ideas, my dreams, my visions, and it didn't quite enable me to pursue them. So I thought, well, I got to go pursue them somewhere else. But if I could have been an entrepreneur, then it could have helped.
Sure.
Different story for a different day. So let's go back to this idea of leadership. And I always like to ask, where did you first become aware of the concept of leadership, of the idea of leadership? It's fascinating to hear the different stories.
That's a great question. I don't think I've ever reflected on that. When did it start? When was the initial seed planted? But now that you say it, I think to myself, it was the opportunity to lead. Someone gave me the opportunity and put me in a position to be successful and to lead and to nurture my leading capabilities. So I would imagine it was very early on, probably in my teens, where I worked for a nonprofit organization and I think they believed in me. They saw something that probably I didn't see at the time. So they put me in a position to be successful, to lead people, to lead programs at a very early age. And I think that was something that it just kind of spawned from there. I got hungry for it, right? I wanted to guide people and move people in a direction where it impacted the organization, it impacted their own individual lives, and in the long term, it really started me down a pathway where it put me in a position, in a career position I never even thought of down the road, that I would be leading an organization, I would be leading nonprofits. And I'd have to say, back in my teens, and people who just believed in what I was about and recognize, I think that that's important to call out their leadership abilities, to recognize something that I had in me, to foster it, to nurture it, and guide me down that path.
And was it conceptualized as leadership, or were you just in a leadership position? Were you just like driving the project forward, or driving the business forward, or driving the initiative, or were you like, or was a language leadership?
No, I think it was, if we look at it, it was, I became an emerging leader. Something needed to be tackled, something had to be handled. And they said, this is probably the person that can do it. And then I had to show initiative, right? Any leader has the propensity to show a little bit of initiative and drive to be able to execute that. I didn't have a formal title at the time. I wasn't given any, again, conceptually, I wasn't given any structure or outcomes and goals. It wasn't like that. It was like, hey, listen, we have a after school program, we have a sports program, it needs to get up and running, here you go, you have the bandwidth to do it, we believe in you, here are the resources, the tools, we'll be watching from afar, you can't mess it up because no one was leading it before. And I think I kind of gravitated, I think that speaks to also my leadership philosophy, is I do value, and I cover this in my book, autonomy. I love having autonomy to make decisions and be creative and see where things go, take those risks that we talk about and try to execute upon them. And that was available during those time periods. So I think that really kind of propelled me into that position, wanting to lead more, wanting to guide, wanting more out of the opportunity.
Tell me a little bit about when you decided to like pursue, leadership, peak performance. Like what motivated you or drove you to that, and how did you get started, and then what did you learn?
So if
The
I
last
had
bit
to,
was a broad question, but I'm curious.
yeah, no, and it kind of piggybacks off of the last one. I think just given an opportunity, I remember when I was going into higher education, I was teaching in the classroom, and I had an opportunity to step into a leadership role, and I actually turned it down. I didn't think I was ready for it. I think I had the foresight to realize that I still was missing a couple pieces. I also was starting my doctorate program, and there was just so many things in the way at the time, and I just felt I couldn't give everything. Interestingly, the opportunity came up a year later, maybe less than a year later, and the people who offered it to me the first time said, "We really want you to reconsider this because we tried a direction, it didn't work, and we think you're going to be best fit for this opportunity." I sat on it for a little bit, and again, it was a re-emerging theme. Someone had identified me, right? And they said, "This is someone who we think can step into this role." So it's this constant reoccurring theme that someone believed in me. They gave me the opportunity, and then I took it upon myself to step into the role. And again, what emerged out of that was it was my first real leading people, peer groups, those even above me in pay grade and all of those things. And I had immediate success. And anytime you have success, you're like, okay, I can do this, right? This is something I'm going to be good at this because I had that initial support, the resources, people believing wholeheartedly that I could do this, and then myself believing in myself that I could execute these things. And then I had that initial success. And then from that point on, I feel like every opportunity that I've had since then, it's just refining and just adding on to my capabilities.
Okay, so it's you show something, and it seems like you show initiative, and there's probably some other characteristics of your personality or your trait that people recognized, and then they put you in a position, and you had success with that. In retrospect, what do you think they saw? So definitely initiative. What else did they see? Because it's something that our leaders need to be looking to find in other leaders as well.
I think drive, not just with, leading with a title and with a job description and outcomes and goals, but pursuits, right? I was pursuing another degree. I wanted to get better at the craft. I think reflection is very critical. I'm a reflective practitioner, so I knew they saw that piece is that I'm willing to take constructive feedback, learn from it, change course ever so slightly if needed, or maybe even transformationally change course. I'm willing to do all of that. I think a great leader has to be open to the possibility of failure and that failure leading to some type of feedback that's going to get them back on course. And if you're open to those things, and I think I have proven that time and time again, I don't come with all of the best ideas. I tell my people that all the time. I don't have the best ideas. I'm not going to come up with all of the solutions. I'm going to look to people that are around me and try to lean on them to figure things out with me in collaboration.
So there's some things here that if I'm a leader and we have a bunch of leaders listening here on the podcast, and we know that the ultimate leadership is to develop other leaders. And we're listening to you, and you're saying you got to give people chances. You got to let them, you got to take some risk. You got to let them be creative. And this is what you want to look for. And you said they have initiative, they have drive. Those are kind of easier to spot, right? Like they come up with ideas, they're sharing, they have energy, they're getting things done. How do you notice someone that is growth oriented or someone that reflects? Like what would be the behaviors that you can observe or the conversations you could have that would say, that person is, has the machine working here and doing something about it?
Well, I think this is a great question because I think there are two types of people. There are solution oriented people and problem oriented people, right? And if you come to me with a solution first, and then you tell me what the problem was, I'm more inclined to work with you and figure it out based upon that you provided me the opportunity to get to action right away. If you come to my door and you're like, well, here's my problem every day, and you have no way out of it, I'm not sure you're going to be very successful in leading other people who are looking to you constantly for ways to proceed out of a situation, a problem. So I always tell my people solution oriented. Come to the door with, if something happened or there's a challenge or an opportunity, how do you plan to solve it? Start from there, start from that vantage point, and then we can proceed. So I'm always looking for those that are solution oriented.
Excellent. So that helps answer because you're going to hear those conversations. You're going to see what's on their mind and be able to identify it very quickly. How about growth minded? I'm a big fan of Carol Dweck and her work, so I'm sure you know about that a little bit. How do you think anyone can quickly notice someone that is growth minded, growth oriented?
So I think it's also how they approach professional development, right? What are their professional development goals? Are they stagnant? When in your one-on-ones and in your conversations with them, when I'm first trying to identify someone that has leadership potential to move them maybe at some point, if they have not overtly told me that they're interested in leading people, but I recognize characteristics that we've pointed out or some other characteristics that they might possess, the growth mindset is something I'm absolutely focused in on. How do they view professional development? How do they view career tracking? How do they tackle problems in the organization? How do they work with their colleagues? I think a growth mindset also, I kind of alluded to this before, was the feedback loop, right? How open to feedback are they? Are they closed off? Are they confrontational? Do they always, are they the victim in every scenario? Or do they just synthesize, listen to the information, ask for additional detail, how to get better, right? I think asking yourself every single day, what can I do to get better in this situation puts you in that growth mindset to begin with. So these are some of the things that I'm looking for.
You've given us some really good details there. So I'm taking some notes really fast here. So it's in their attitude, it's how they are taking the feedback, it's what kind of questions, clarifying questions they are asking. They are open and not defensive about it, so they don't see it as an attack, but rather as an opportunity for growth. So all these things have a big impact in you as a leader recognizing if people are open or closed, growth minded or not. So here's another one that I'm very curious. How do we know if somebody is the reflecting type, right? How do we know if they are reflecting and coming up with stuff and sharing it, or if they're not that type?
I think it's also it depends on how you kind of structure the culture and the environment in the workplace, right? Removing silos, removing from people from being individual practitioners, and watching them how they interact with their colleagues, or if they're volunteering in the organization to be on committees. And that kind of sends a message to me that they're at least willing to be reflective practitioners. They still might need some growth in that area. I can remember times, many times in my career where I was receiving feedback and I got, very protective, very hesitant to receive it. Maybe even questioning the leader in front of me, something along the lines of, well, they don't do the job or they haven't done the job in 20 years. How can they tell me what's going on? And it's that ability to pause for a second and say, well, wait a second, they're just seeing it from a different lens. They're looking at it from a different viewpoint. I'm putting myself in that person's position and at least having the willingness to hear them out and to have a real professional dialogue. I think that that's the first step. So the reflective piece, I think it's multi-layered. I don't think it's just one thing I'm looking for. I'm looking for a variety of pieces. Also being open to coaching how to be coached, right? I talk to my leaders about that all the time. We have to kind of walk people through the feedback loop. You have people, this goes to some of my topical and research more recently. We have now young millennials and Gen Z in the workforce now. They may not know how to receive feedback. They may never have had to have feedback given to them from a professional standpoint. So I think it's only fair that we recognize they might not come in with the skill sets to be reflective practitioners. They don't have it behind them. And there's a lot of research with this related to millennials as well. During, the double dip recession in the late, 2009 to 2013, and during COVID, there was a lot of opportunities from millennials taken from that. They didn't enter the workforce at certain points where maybe Gen X and baby boomers did at the age of 15, 16. Maybe they didn't enter the workforce into their early 20s. So there have been skill sets that we have developed as former generations that it's being delayed in some of these other generations. And I think feedback is one of them. So we need to walk them through it. We need to be fundamentally fair that they might not have everything that we're looking for. And if we're great leaders and we're good coaches and we're managing people correctly, we're also providing them the opportunity to grow in that space.
I absolutely love it. And I want to go back to a point that you mentioned because it's it's something that we don't have in mind, but once we get clear about that, then we can do a better job of it. And it's like priming and preparing the space for the conversations that need to happen. And what you said is we got to help people learn how to get coached, right? There's a clip on the internet somewhere, Mike Schmidt, the ex-CEO of Google, when when somebody suggests that he get coached, he's like, wait a minute, I'm a experienced CEO, high level. Are you saying there's something wrong with me? And they said, no, 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 no. I mean, look, it's about your growth, development, having someone, da, da, da. And later on, he's like, well, it's the best thing I ever did, getting someone, to coach me and be supportive. So number one is a mindset of it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It just means you have to be doing something better. And then just teaching them. So I'm curious, how do you teach someone how to get coached?
Well, I think it depends on the person that's in front of us, right? Some people gravitate towards different ways of learning, right? So I think if I have someone, I'll just use an example. If I have someone in front of me that's hesitant to coaching, I might tackle it from a mentorship perspective, right? Maybe if they're reluctant, well, this is a good example using the one you kind of used with someone who has the experience, they're seasoned, they're a veteran at this, but you're recognizing that they still have an opportunity to grow. I might use a mentoring approach, taking them under my wing and trying to figure out how I can best lay the pathway and conversations for them to be almost disarming, if you will. I think that that's an opportunity as well. We want to disarm them, and we don't want to be like, well, listen, you're not performing well. And I deal with this a lot in my career where I have high level leaders that have done the job longer than maybe I've even been alive. And so they're coming with all of these experiences and they're coming with all of this level of education, but yet leadership is not an end destination, right? You don't land there and then you're there on your island and that's it. You're constantly evolving. So I think through mentorship, through guided, conversations, disarming them to some degree, it's going to go a long way in them adopting and buying into what you're trying to get them to do. Also, and I'll end on this, I think you need to kind of walk the talk a little bit. I can't suggest, coaching or mentorship or growth if I'm not willing to go down that same pathway. And I think you have to demonstrate to those that you're leading that you are willing to be open to all those ideas as well.
I love that. Starting with that, right? So walk the talk. If you want someone to get coached, the question is, are you getting coached? And I love the idea of it's an opportunity to grow versus you're inadequate. And ultimately, you have to vary your approach depending on the individual and their needs and do the job that's required for that person. Now, let me ask you this: what makes a good coachee? Not a great coach, not a good coach, but a good, a person receiving the coaching.
Well, I'm a firm believer in leadership. You have to be a great leader. You have to be a great follower, right? Followership is so important in leadership. If you haven't at one time, if you've always, because of your personality and who you are and your command and control, you've always taken over things, then you probably are going to have difficulty in team leadership and participative leadership, collaborative leadership opportunities. So I think same thing goes here. Someone who is being coached has to be open to those concepts and those philosophies that the person in front of me, they may have it right. And in my book and in my research, I talk about this a lot where you have baby boomers and millennials, right? And most often than not, those two groups are kind of, when they're together, they're kind of at each other. They're kind of, it's like, baby boomers are constantly at millennials because of all of the things that millennials identify with. And the millennials are constantly critiquing boomers because of all the things they identify with. And in the middle is this group, Gen X, who is the bridge, who looks at it and says, I kind of agree with both of you. And we need to sit you both down and figure out how to do all of this, right? And it's no different than when we're coaching someone, we're hoping the person who's giving the coaching and who's receiving the coaching understands it from both perspectives.
1 second, sorry. It's getting dark here. I was using natural light, but it's starting to get a little dark. So we're gonna edit that out. All right. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that. I think it's something that's very interesting for current leaders, current CEOs, current owners to understand and recognize how the makeup of their teams is evolving and how it requires some understanding in working with them in a different way. So what do you think are some like your top findings, some of your top pieces of advice for the leaders out there that have to deal with boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and get ready for the next one, right?
Yeah. So, I think this is the next opportunity before us. For the last decade, there's been a hyper focus on diversifying the workforce, and that comes in a variety of different ways. And the research supports it. We need different people in the work environment from A to Z for better outcomes, for better productivity, different concepts and philosophies and how we lead. That's all great, but are we focusing also as a part of the diversity conversation, how we're going to manage the multi-generational workforce, which is right here, it's in our lap. Right now, we have, just because of a lot of things that have unfolded outside the work environment, specifically COVID, economic impact, that we now have right now 4 generations in the work environment. We have baby boomers, we have Gen X, we have millennials, and we have Gen Z. They're all together there, and they view the world very differently. So if you think about it, for 8 hours of the day, give or take, you have all of these people contributing in a positive way to the organizational outcomes, but there is going to be conflict. There's going to be disagreement. There's going to be different philosophies about how we do business today. And I think leadership, ownership, CEOs need to recognize this as the next big opportunity to get people moving in the right direction. So, you asked, what is identifiable here? Well, just looking at how they view the world, I look at Generation X, and it's a very unique generation, and we classify them, give or take 2 to 3 years, between 1965 and 1980. And again, generational cohorts, they're not locked on the day. There's a little bit of overlap on each side, right? But it's interesting what they value. They value autonomy. They're independent thinkers. They enjoy work-life. They were the first group to come up with the concept of work-life balance. Our baby boomers, you worked in an organization for 20 to 30 years, you stayed with the same company, you took your 2 weeks of vacation, and that was it. And then Gen X comes in and says, well, wait a second, that's not how we view the world. So we look at it just a little bit differently. We are open to the idea of being a free agent. We might move job to job, and for a variety of reasons. One of them being work-life balance. Does the company provide that? Autonomy. They were the first cohort to really look at, if you look at LGBTQ rights and activism, they were the first to introduce it into the work environment as a critical opportunity, right? So you have baby boomers who were just very faithful to the old guard. You have this new group, Gen X, coming into the workplace, not coming in right now. What they're doing right now is their opportunity is going into management and leadership because boomers are on their way out. The only reason we have a lot of the younger boomers in the workplace right now for a variety of economic collapses and needing, that income to stay in the work environment, or because of things like COVID, where employers have had to retain the talent because of mass exodus and people doing remote working and things like that. And then you have the millennials. They have a completely different worldly view than baby boomers and Gen X. So it's just about, in summary, a good leader will identify what all of these cohorts possess. What is the operational organizational goal? How can we, when we're in conversations with the different groups and they're collaborating or they're giving their ideas, how we can have an open ear and listen to all of this, how we can make strategic decisions based upon the groups in front of us, and how we can prepare for the next generational cohort coming in. Gen Z, they're starting to enter the workforce. Gen Z is 96 to 2010, so that's their birth rate. They're coming in, they're in early infancy of their careers. They're going to be led completely different than millennials, believe it or not, because they're actually the digital natives. They know nothing but the digital world that we live in, where Gen X was in the world before and in the new world. So knowing all of these pieces, I think we are equipping a leader to have all of the tools in their tool chest to be successful in navigating these conversations.
So here's a question. We talk a lot about the importance of organizational values and them being known, clear, aligned, consistent. But on the other hand, we're saying you've got 4 different generations with 4 different intrinsic values. And the question is, how do you build consistency? Because if the original founders were boomers, then they're going to have boomer values. If the original owners are millennials, they're going to have millennial values. So how do you kind of figure out how to both have clear organizational culture and values and guiding principles and ensure that they fit with 4 different generations?
This is a great question, honestly. And it's something I really looked at in my research, because what emerges is it's not the employee's responsibility. Think about it for a second. We've hired someone, we brought them in, we trained them up, we've identified them as great talent, but then we throw it back on them to figure these things out. Where really it's kind of the organization has to become the reflective practitioner to say, this mission statement, these core values, what we believe in, have we crafted them to be identifiable to the workplace, meeting the employee where they're at, right? So if we have an organization that was created in the 1950s, or it was first developed, or an idea, whatever it is, back when the baby boomers were in the workforce, and now they're gone. They're not there anymore. They're fading out. And now your employees are identifiable between X, millennial, and Gen Z, but you have not changed your philosophies to meet the modern world. You can be stubborn and you can see how it plays out, or you can at least reevaluate. And I think that organizations that get this right are constantly in a growth and change mindset to meet their employees where they are, versus trying to fit them into a puzzle that just it's not going to work out. That's what I would say probably is best. Is I'm not saying you have to completely change your mission statement and your values, but I think you have to really look at what's coming down the pike. Gen Z is coming down the pike. They will look, I will give this as an example and I'll end on this, is that a Gen Zer will look at how we do work and they will question it up and down because it doesn't make sense to them. And I'll give you a prime example. If they can do something on an app that takes them 10 minutes to do, and it takes you an hour to do, you better believe they're going to ask you, why are you doing it this way? And if you say, well, it's what we always do, we've always done it this way, and that's the end all to be all, your next working cohort won't be there. They're going to be in the company that adopts the philosophy that makes up their cohort. And again, I'm not trying to be radical here. It just kind of makes sense that we kind of have to be evolving with the people that are in front of us, within reason, of course.
I think it could be a long conversation, because you've got some values and they are intrinsic to the organization. You have values that are intrinsic to the generations. And I love what you're saying about making them clearly identifiable, because that way you can have people deselect themselves up right off the bat, right? And as you said, it's not completely black or white, but you have the Gen Zs that can, respond and understand the values of maybe the Generation X and are okay in that environment, or are they radical to where if it isn't a super Z, they're not going to be interested. So when you can communicate those values very, very clearly, you can help people deselect themselves and say, that's not the place for me.
I
When
agree with
you
that.
promise something and don't deliver, then that there's issues. When it's not clear, then there's issues as well. So
Sure.
I think a lot of it has to do with the clarity and this crazy idea, right? Evolve. And I say it's crazy because like your core values, they don't change. They're supposed to be the same forever because that's what you really care about. But you're saying it's fluid and it has to evolve and it has to adapt. And you probably are not going to change, like go 180 degrees
Right.
the opposite direction, but recognizing that you serve a market and the market is both the people out there and the people in here, and you've got to adapt to serve both.
The biggest companies, the standard bearers, the McDonald's, the Walmarts, everybody changes. You have to change. And again, it can be incremental. It does not have to be transformational change all the time. And I do, I identify, and my the way I purchase, you know, the way I act as a consumer, I definitely identify with organizations that have very strong values, that are very concrete with where they stand. I think we've learned a lot in the last decade that, a lot of people do identify, they kind of, whether we like it or not, you're an iPhone or you're a Samsung, right? We kind of do this. And so I don't think, I agree with you. I don't think we have to do a complete, 180 on the situation. But I think if you're smart and you're looking at the environment and you're saying, where are the people, and from a hiring perspective, and that's really what we're talking about, recruiting the next generation, we have to meet them somewhat where they are. And the very least, and I've seen this time and time again, give them the opportunity, like you said, to opt out. Like while you're in the hiring practice and while you're recruiting people, be very clear and intentional on what your expectations are before you get them in, because we have a lot of buyer beware. One of the things I think is important, we always talk about the 90-day. I think we should offer our employees 90 days to critique us. Did we arrive on all of the things that we promised in the interview stages, and then in the hiring stages, did we deliver? And I think it's mutual, holding them accountable to performance, but holding us accountable to again, walking that talk.
That is a conversation I like to have often because I joke about the 1950s management style. And back in the day, having a job was something you'd be thankful for, right? There have been a bunch of depressions where our parents or grandparents didn't have jobs, didn't have money. There wasn't food on the table. You didn't know there was going to be food on the table. And then, you were just happy and thankful to have a job. And then the employees were, well, you should be thankful for me and you're going to do as you're told. But as times have changed and now we're at a place where people have options, then it's not about them being grateful to have a job, right? And it's not about them serving us. It's us as leaders serving our team members and reconvincing them and reselling them that they are in the right place, pursuing the right things. And it's a definitely a shift in mindset from boomers to these newer generations. So let me shift gears here for a little bit. So I know you do a lot of work on the performance front, right? The term peak performance gets thrown around quite a bit, but it's about improving performance. Where do you think performance and leadership meet? And how do we as leaders help deliver better performance?
Yeah. So I would say, for me, what I value, progress over perfection. Every day of the week, progress over perfection. I want to see that we're getting better in some facet, whether it's part of, our KPIs, our operational outcomes. Also, just looking at the people that are, in front of me, those that are leading me and those behind me who I'm leading. I want to see us getting better in some facet. We have to be getting better in some way. And again, it can be incremental. It doesn't have to be this full blown out. We've made, all this money, or we've done all of these. We've performed so well this year. We've exceeded every single goal. I will take the incremental progress, especially if we're coming out of a slump or there has been some type of pitfall. If I can see it and I can articulate it and I can show that, see what we did there? It was just a little bit of a move. We can gain so much momentum there, and we can lead people, in consistent improvement. So that's where I like to always start. That's my frame of reference, if you will. Let's see the progress and let's work towards perfection, knowing that we're probably not going to land on there. And if we get lucky and then we have that one off where we had that perfect performance or that perfect 100% outcome, then you know what? That was a great day. Let's take that. Let's learn even from that and move forward. That's the growth mindset that, we were kind of talking about before. Can you capitalize on the little wins? There's a bunch of opportunities, especially as a leader, to benchmark those wins and kind of accumulate those versus we're always looking for the home run or the grand slam, aren't we? And that's just not practical. We can't, every at bat isn't going to lead a ball out of the park. Hit those singles, hit those doubles, and let's get on base.
I appreciate that, right? It's having the right idea on what performance is, and it's recognizing that you get better every day consistently, and you add that up and it compounds to a lot. How do you lead yourself, and how do you improve your own performance so our audience can kind of model that, right? And they can figure out how they can improve their performance as well.
Accountability. I'm a stickler for it. I want accountability. I want someone to hold me accountable to the things that I say I'm going to do and the outcomes I'm supposed to produce. And I think sometimes leaders, especially people maybe even in the C-suite, they think maybe sometimes accountability might be above them. It's for other people to handle, and let's hold them accountable. And if it doesn't happen, then let's figure out, how to fix them. But I think if you show that accountability is not a dirty word, it's something we all should gravitate towards, welcome, set that expectation, I think it speaks volumes for the people that are behind you or the people that are next to you. So I would say it starts and ends with me, accountability. I want to be held accountable, and I want to show to people that accountability is something that we should all be adopting.
I literally use the same words, right? Accountability is not a dirty word. And I will, if I can add, I like to say that, accountability allows us to measure, and you can't manage what you don't measure. So once you're managing and you're measuring, now you know how to get better. Now you know what to improve. And without measures, without numbers, you don't know what you need to do. And people have the wrong perception of accountability. So why do you think people need external accountability? Why are we bad at keeping ourselves accountable, doing what we're supposed to, and accomplishing what we said we wanted?
I think I'll take it from a leadership standpoint. I think we get to this, I kind of said it a little bit, but we get to this point in our careers or in our journey where we think we've arrived and we don't have to be held accountable anymore. We are the boss, or we are the leader, and we are in charge. So we then have to, I don't know if we think we're above it. I don't want to say that, but we get into that kind of, mindset that we might be above it. And I think that it's like a fool's goal. It's not accurate. If we've learned anything in the last 2 decades, the people at the top need to be held the most accountable, because they yield and wield the most power sometimes, whether it's perceived power or it's, exact power. It doesn't really matter. They're in charge. And so I think we need to hold them sometimes even more accountable. I think people just shy away from it when they get to a certain stage, and they're like, okay, well, maybe that's not something for me. Maybe it's for the people. It's really for the people. The rules are really for the other people. And I think when we get into that, it can become a disaster.
Okay, so then you have to kind of lead by example, like you were saying before. And if you're going to want to keep other people accountable, then you've got to have that accountability as well. So let's go a little bit more into that mindset. So how did you evolve into recognizing that? Well, you talked to us a little bit about how people recognized your leadership abilities or skills, gave you the opportunity, and you kind of started, running with it. And right now, the question was, how do you lead yourself? And you said, well, I lead myself with a lot of accountability and having accountability. What else goes into that equation for that self leadership and being able to lead others? How do you ensure that you are improving the performance? So, you work with organizations, with teams, even with children. I think that we can learn most more about humanity through children than we can through adults. That's just my thought as a parent. I wonder what you have learned with working with all these different types of groups in terms of what it takes to lead people, humanity, and improve their performance. So accountability, one ingredient. What are some others?
Yeah, structure. Whether I believe structure is extremely important, not only just for children, but I have found most people in the work environment, even though I'm someone who loves autonomy. I'm an independent thinker. I love to be kind of on my own. I love collaboration, but I also love that opportunity to figure things out in my own space, right? But it's always within structure. It's always within a framework, right? I know my KPIs, I know my goals. If I don't have them, I set them, right? When I came into my current organization, we were still working on defining a lot of things, because it's newer, so that doesn't mean I stop. It doesn't mean I say, well, they don't exist, so I'm not going to worry about it. I figure it out for myself. I set the roadmap, I set the parameters, and I try to figure out how am I going to create structure for me and my people, right? Because they're desiring these things. No one wants to come in and you don't know policy, you don't know procedure, you don't know what's going on. Every day is just wing it. You're not going to retain people very long. And how do you lead that way? Because then what are your expectations for those people you are leading? So I would say accountability. I would say structure. I would say something you talked about before is just that growth mindset. My leadership philosophy, I am a participative leader. I'm a democratic leader. I enjoy that feedback. I enjoy hearing people's ideas and how they process the work environment. But I also want to learn. I constantly want to grow. I want to learn new things, new concepts. One of my goals this year is to learn a new language, start that process. That's going to feed my cup. And in return, as we talked about earlier in the program, it's going to help the organization too, because I'm in a constant learning mindset. I'm an educational leader, so it goes hand in hand, right? I want to be able to, I can't work in an educational environment if I'm not open to the idea of being a lifelong learner. That would make sense. So it goes back to that destination piece as well. So again, accountability, structure, growth mindset. Yeah, I think that's how I would round it out.
So you mentioned that your leadership style has to do with participatory or participative, democratic, looking for feedback, looking for learning, looking for accountability. I'm going to hone in on the democratic, right? So there's a mistake I see in businesses done frequently, which is like managing with a popular vote.
Mm,
And I often, as I coach the CEO, it isn't, right? Like you don't take the popular vote. It's a dictatorship. You can listen to all the feedback, but ultimately you have to make the decision that you think is right. So
absolutely.
how does that connect with leadership outside just the realm of business and in connection with what exactly is democratic for you when you think about being a democratic leader?
Well, I think I kind of blend the two together, participative and democratic, because they're kind of overlapping in theory. If you look at the two theories of both leadership principles, they do differentiate to your point of like, well, everybody gets an equal say in the end outcome, which is not the case, right? At the end of the day, any leader who's whether you're a transactional leader, you're a laissez-faire, you're authoritarian leader, whatever you decide is your main framework of leadership, at the end of the day, there's one truth. You're going to have to make the decision, right? You're going to have to figure out, and even if you report to another layer of people, you're going to have to explain all of the steps along the way of how you got to this conclusion. And what I find valuable is, and this is time and time again, is if I have to explain my decision and I've used a participative or a democratic way, I don't want to use this word as like checking off the box, but I have to some degree by getting that feedback. If I skip that layer and I just make a decision and it's unilateral and I just say, that's it, this is what it's going to be, If I was above me, I would say, well, what kind of feedback did you get? Is this what everybody believes in? That'd be my first question. And I want to be able to answer that to anybody, whether it's the public or whether it's the CEO of my company. I want to be able to say to that person, no, you know what? I sat these people down. We had a discussion. We talked about it. We roundtabled it. We sent out a survey. I had all of their information. I have all of the data. I was able to proceed and then make that determination, because that's the skill set that I have, is to be able to take it all, figure it out, and then kind of move the decision forward. We can't get, they call it analysis paralysis, right? Where we're in some of these conversations all day long, all week long, and we're constantly just talking about the same thing, and we never move it across the line. And I think a really good sound leader can, in a participative and democratic way, they know the difference. Conversation needs to end at some point. We need to move the decision forward.
I love that. Let me take a quick note. So I love one of the ideas that you share that I love is this concept that you have to be able to explain the decision. And my rational brain just absolutely loves that, right? Because it means we've got to have clarity and a focus and attention and intention. But I always hear, and I also actually believe in it. I have my own thoughts on this. I would love to hear yours, where using your intuition, right? And I see a bunch of leaders that mention their gut as the source of their decision and how it works for them. And many times I want to explain how, even though that's great, it leaves people feeling like they don't know what the heck's going on, or that they don't have a say. My thoughts on that intuition is that you've got to reflect, like you were saying before, right? Like, you've got to be able to reflect. You've got to be able to connect the dots. From what I understand of the brain, it's like the subconscious brain processes information much faster than the conscious brain. So your gut might be your, subconscious brain processing a bunch of information, which hasn't quite been fed to the more conscious prefrontal cortex. So therefore you can't verbalize your decision, and therefore you can't explain it. And you're saying, to be a good leader, you've got to explain it to get people to understand why you're making a certain decision. So that's the way that I see it. I'd love to hear what I got right, what I got wrong, and how you see it differently.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, I agree. I would probably agree with almost 99% of what you said. There's a philosophy of in the military, trust but verify, right? You'll constantly hear that from military personnel. Trust but verify. And I think when you hear anyone in the organization that presents information and they say, I got this gut feeling, I just feel this is the way we need to go. What I will say to them is, love it. I love the gut feeling. Prove it. That's all. Prove it down to me. And how you go about it, that's okay. If you're data, if you're, let's say you're data driven, so you're going to quantify it for me. Okay, let me see the numbers. Let's say you're not, that's not your skill set, and you have a narrative based upon case studies or based upon your experience. Hey, qualitatively, tell me the story. You have to sell me on your gut if you're going to just use your gut as the test that we're going to make a decision here. And it could be a small decision or a big decision. The other thing too is, and I do this, and I don't know if it's the right thing to do, but I do evaluate where you are in the organization in terms of your experience. And I think that that's fair. I really do. I might be on the minority of your listeners, but I say to myself, if a Gen Z walks into my office and says, I think we need to do this, I'm going to require a lot more data than maybe, let's say, someone who's 20 years in. Both have the same test. I still want to see the support why you feel this way. But I'd be a little bit more inclined to ask additional questions, additional data points from someone who has 3 to 5 years in industry experience versus someone who's made a complete career out of this. Again, not trying to change the goalposts for either of them. I want to keep it somewhat fair, but I think those who are in an industry or in a field for 20, 30 years, we know that they can come with all kinds of issues and mistakes and things like that, but I think we owe it to them to at least be in their corner to say, you know what, let's play this out a little bit more, but maybe not as much as someone who's just starting out.
I appreciate that. And I really like how you said it. Look, you have a gut feeling, love it. Now prove it. So either bring me the numbers or explain the narrative. Don't just leave it at that. So you're forcing them to think and really process the idea and to reflect on the idea and to bring you something. And then just being smart about, if the situation requires knowledge, experience that is valuable in that decision making, you take that into account and you're willing to move with a little different fluidity depending on that level of experience. Robert, let's talk a little bit about. I know you have a bunch of books. I'm sure there's a bunch of tools. There's a bunch of frameworks. Our audience, entrepreneurs, business owners, leaders in many different ways. What is a tool or a framework that you think anyone can use to help them be a better leader, to get their team aligned, to help move their team forward? What is something that you use that you could share?
So I'm gonna offer something that's a little bit different, and something that this is how I now lead. And I tell people, and this was the genesis of my book, is I lead like a Gen Xer. So when people have asked me, like, what's your leadership philosophy? Yeah, I shared. I'm a participative, democratic team builder. I love those concepts. I love collaboration. I lean on the old school charismatic leadership when I'm talking to a big group of people and trying to move people in the right direction. But in the last probably 4 to 5 years, I've heard this from me. I've had a little bit of success in a couple different areas, and people have asked this question, like, "Well, how do you get people moving in that direction? What do you do differently?" And I really lead like a Gen Xer. And when I say that, they say, "Well, what does that mean? What does leading like a Gen Xer mean?" And it comes down to these three things. And I'm telling you, it's the secret sauce. First one, hire good people. So what does that mean? Hire good people. Invest as much as you can in identifying and finding the talent that's out there. We know in today's environment, people are willing to leave organizations. They're not as committed. So there's a variety of reasons why people want to shift. So find where they are, find the talent. Then when you find the talent, number two is you got to train them. You got to train them how you want them to act and look, not to the nth degree, but like you talked about it earlier, values. So if I find the right person and now I bring them in, what a waste not to onboard them, mentor them, develop them right out of the gate, not waiting until they get their first year or until they get their benefits. From day one, train them how you see fit. And the third one, and I'm telling you, it's everything to me. Get out of their way. Get out of their way. We spend so much time hiring the right person, training the right person, and then putting up so many roadblocks in front of them. And then what happens is leave, because we promised them all of these things and all of these opportunities and all these ways to contribute and how special they are. And you're the best talent. And we found you and we hired you out of 200 people. And then we make it almost impossible for them to succeed. It doesn't make sense. So when people say to me, what's your philosophy today? And what's your framework? I lead like a Gen Xer. I hire good people. I spend a tremendous amount of time training them. And then I get out of their way.
Wow. You really simplified that and make it look very achievable for so many people, because it shouldn't be that complex, except there is complexity in doing each of those steps right. And
Sure.
I'm sure your books can go into a little bit more detail and elaborating on that, right? But yeah, this really resonates. And it's so obvious, the right people. But you gave it a very particular wrinkle, which I think is really important, which you said, invest in the process of identifying where they are,
Yeah.
right? So it's not just pay them well, it's invest in the process of finding where they are. And then really on them and putting a lot of the upfront investment in it, which the resistance is going to be, well, what if I spend all this money and then they leave and now blah, right? And then the answer is, well, what if you don't and they stay?
You know what's funny
And
about
then,
that?
I'm sorry?
What I find interesting about that is when we take that, and I've heard that so many times, Max, you bring up a great point, is, well, what if they leave? If you're already thinking when you hire the person, the first week they're there, that what if they leave? So I'm not going to provide the X, Y, and Z. You think about your mindset, right? Your
Yeah.
mindset is, well, wait a second, I'm already anticipating something happening that's not going to be favorable to the organization. You know, I have, and I'll just real quick on this, I think it's important. I had an employee that I hired, and she was here for, I would think, about 3 months. Every day she would come by my office and she would say, thank you so much for hiring me. This is the best place I've ever worked. This is so great. And she talked about it constantly because we invested so much in the early stages. We do this with everybody, but specifically with that position, because we saw a little bit of turnover. We saw some things we didn't like. So we said, no, 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 we're not going to pull away. We're going to put more into this to capture this person. And I kid you not, unfortunately, something happened and very untimely, she passed away. And it was her third or fourth month here with us.
Right
And
there.
her husband came in to visit. And why he wanted to come in was every day that this employee went home and talked about how it has been the best job of her life. And it comes down to people, it comes down to resources, it comes down to energy and investing in people. And if you do that, I never thought for a minute that she was going to leave, right? We found the right person, we're training the right person, we're providing the right resources. And then the benefit is she just loved her job. And I honestly, again, unfortunately, those circumstances, but hearing her husband talk about it, and because I was like, oh, well, she would say this all the time and she would talk to the other team members about it. But hearing that when she went home to the most important people in her life and talked about it every day, that told me we're getting it right. We're doing the right thing by our people. And I think that that's important.
I appreciate that. We always talk about the importance of providing better quality of life for people. Many businesses that I work with, have worked with, been part of, it's all about, providing products and services and making their lives better. And we forget that the most important people that we first have to improve their lives are our own people. And and what you're saying is the approach to ensure that, look, if you are transforming the people's life internally, you're more likely to transform people's life externally. But don't expect to transform people's life externally if you're not doing it in-house first. And I think it's a very powerful mindset. And I think it's a very powerful shift. And I think we need to continue to drive it because again, we're not in the 1950s anymore, right? And we got to continue to transform that. So I really, really appreciate it. So I'm going to try to do a little bit of a summary. We've covered a lot. We've talked about a lot of stuff. And of course, at the end of that, if there's anything else that I have missed, anything else you'd want to share, I'll let you share that before we kind of start to wrap up. But here are some of the key ideas that I got and some of the notes that I took. And a big concept is that we need to identify the leaders within. And I think that one of the ways that you do it is to provide opportunities for people first, right? See certain behaviors, and based on those behaviors, give them those opportunities. And some of the things you talked about were people that have initiative, they have a drive, they want to grow, they are reflective, they are adaptive, they want to change. They're open to failure, they're solutions oriented. They bring solutions, and then the problem's not the other way around. So when you spot people like that, give them opportunities. So identify them and give them opportunities and see what kind of they can do with those opportunities. And that had a major impact in your life with the opportunities. And then you said something, which I'm just going to repeat, which is just because they are younger, just because they have a lower position than somebody else, doesn't mean that they couldn't lead people with more tenure, more experience, higher positions. And I think that's a big shift in mindset because you sometimes think that leadership has to come from above, and you're saying that's not necessarily the case. So I really think that that's an important concept. You talked a little bit about the people that have to be open to feedback, want to be better, ask how they can be better, not be defensive about it. You want people that like to collaborate. You want to break down silos. And one of the things that you noticed is that people want to participate in different committees. They want to integrate. They want to help and serve in other ways as a key thing that you can find out who are the people that are out there, right? You explained how you need to teach people how to go through the feedback loop. In other words, how to get coached. And I really believe that opens a whole discussion, right? It's don't just coach them, teach them how to get coached. And I think that's a very powerful concept. You said you got to vary your approach per person, right? Everybody's different. And you got to understand what kind of drives them and motivates them. Ensure that they understand that coaching is an opportunity to grow, and it's not just overcoming an inadequacy. So because you suck, but because you can get better. And then walk the talk. So if you want someone to get coached, you better be getting coaching yourself, because you got to demonstrate that we all have opportunities for growth. You said to be a great leader, you also have to be a great follower. And that's important, because people think that, leaders are born, and I'm sure some people are born with more, some leadership traits more than others. But if they can't follow, then they're not going to have the best type of leadership style. Then we went into the 4 generations, and recognizing the fact that the current workspace has 4 different types of generations with 4 different types of values that learned very different things from their parents, from their environments, from the economic conditions. And they add a lot of value to the organization, but we need to help them work well together. And we need to understand their different drivers and recognize that they each play a role. The challenge is you sometimes have values that are maybe a little bit antiquated or old, that are not adapting to the current conditions, and you need to keep evolving them. Because if you don't, then you might find yourself not attracting the right people. And then you've got to have a lot of clarity on what those values are to allow people to opt themselves out, to not be interested in working with you. If they are vague, if they are general, if they are not clear, then people can't figure out if it's the right place or not. All right, a few more things. So I love you mentioned something. You said when we hire people, the 90-day evaluation has to go both ways. Not just about us evaluating them, but them evaluating the job, the organization. We bring people in and we promise them the world. Are we delivering? Right? And again, it's this mindset shift from you are happy to be employed here to we are happy to have you here and we want to keep you here. We talked a little bit about how to drive performance, and you focused in on the idea of progress over perfection and asking how are we getting better, and ensuring that we accumulate small wins, build momentum, and that actually compounds and delivers the performance that we're looking for. And it's not about hitting these grand slams or home runs. It's about building it consistently. Then you talked about accountability and the importance of it. And you said, hey, many times you think, you're at the top and the rules don't apply to you, but accountability is not, you're not above it. It's not below you. You got to welcome it, and you got to use it as a mechanism to improve. And another element to leading yourself and others is making sure that there's good structure, frameworks and goals and tools. You talked to us a little bit about your style, saying proactive, democratic, wanting feedback, having accountability. And then you've got to be able to explain your decisions. At the end of the day, as a leader, you have to understand that the conversation needs to end and you have to make a decision. What a nice way of saying it, right? At the end of the day, we got a little bit into the democratic decision and managing by popular vote. And you said, no, not it, but it's gathering the information. We talked a little bit about the trust but verify. And when people want to use their gut and you say, hey, yep, love it, but prove it. And it's not just about proving it with numbers. You can also have a good narrative that really explains things, right? And then you as a leader have to take into consideration their tenure, their experience, their knowledge into that decision, and how much you kind of scrutinize it, or how much you need to dig into it, right? So that's really important. And then you kind of closed with this beautiful idea probably how we're going to name this podcast, which is Lead Like a Gen Xer. Lead Like a Gen Xer, where you clearly explain that you have to hire good people. And to do it, you have to invest a lot of money on the process. Invest a lot of money on identifying the talent, finding it, bringing in the best talent possible, training them up front, onboarding them up front, educating them into your culture, everything that you need to do up front, not later, up front, and investing heavily on it. And then if they are well trained and they are the right person, there's nothing else to do but getting out of their way. Then you get out of their way, let them perform, let them have the autonomy. If they are the right person and they have the right training, they're going to do amazing things for you. I'm sure I've missed a thing or two, but that's some of the notes that I have. Did I miss anything? And is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, you didn't miss anything. I think you covered it all, and you are a great note taker because you had a lot more stuff than I had. So that was well executed. I think as far as anything else, it's just why I'm here today specifically. This conversation was amazing. I love talking about these things, as I'm sure you're well aware of. Anytime we can have a dialogue, any of us in this field, and really talk about our craft, right? I'm a stickler for this. So when it comes to leadership and education, and I talk about this in my other book, is that you know we need to promote leadership as a profession. We need to promote teaching as a profession. We need to hold on to that because I think when people ask, can anybody do it? I don't believe so. I believe people have the capacity to be great leaders and to be great teachers, but it's a craft. And if you're not nurturing your craft and you're not promoting it and figuring it out and getting better at it, then no, you can't. You can't be a great leader and you can't be a great teacher. That's my philosophy. And I think, again, one piece of today was the importance of this concept that I kind of fell into a couple of years back, which is and recognizing that generations, they're here. We're creating now micro generations. Before it was 20-year cohorts. Now we're down to we can't even name generations fast enough today because they're happening at a quicker rate, less than 2 years in some cases, where everything societal, pop culture, technology is defining a new generation upon new generation. But the ones that are currently in the work environment definitely need attention because as a leader, we want to make sure we're marshaling these groups in the right direction because they're going to look to us. And I strongly advocate the Gen X leader, our next group of CEOs, our next group of politicians that are going to be leading our people in a variety of fields. They are positioned very well based upon their skill sets and what they have already accomplished in their lives and how they were reared and the technology and all of the things that make up a generation. They are positioned very well to be exceptional leaders, and that's the essence of Gen Exceptional, which is my book, and it just came out, and I'm hoping your audience gives it some consideration. It's a quick read. It's available on Amazon and at Barnes and Nobles and on my website, drdefinis.com. Just definitely championing the cause for Generation X.
I appreciate it. I'm with you. I believe that we need tools, we need knowledge, we need to develop the skills, and the only way to get better is by investing time, energy, and effort into it in all three parts. So I always appreciate when there's book that has research behind it, has been put in practice. You've gotten and learned insight. So it's not just theory and it's not just like stumbling into things. It's like putting those two together. And that's how we learn the fastest. So anybody that is into leadership and wanting to be a better leader, go check it out. So one more time, the name of the book and your website, please.
Gen Exceptional. And the book can be found on Amazon. It is in paperback. It is hardback, and then it's also in electronic. It's an ebook, and then it's also on my website through iUniverse, which is the publisher, and that's drdefinis.com.
Excellent. Couldn't be easier than that. So, Robert, just before we let you go, what's something good, fun, happy that you're looking forward to that's going to be happening in the next few weeks or months?
I continue on this journey, just kind of getting this information out there. I'll be on some of these podcast tours and just talking to exceptional podcasters like yourself and just kind of getting out there and just be promoting this whole concept. Also, again, I kind of like I opened up at the beginning of the program here, just going into the new year, very grateful, lots of gratitude that I've had this year to kind of put some of these projects together and get them across. We're always looking to cross them over that finish line. And this year I have some additional projects coming up that I'm really looking forward to sink my teeth into. And I'm big on collaborating with my own peer group and looking for opportunities out there to expand some of these concepts, right? So that's what the new year looks like. And I'm just chomping at the bit to get there.
Well, Robert, once again, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. We really enjoyed it. It was a great conversation. Thanks for taking the time, and best of luck with the book.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.